Today's shiur begins roughly in the middle of Daf Kuf Aleph, Omen Aleph. If you like, you can count 21 lines from the top. In the middle of the line, Velo Blois. In our previous shiur, we saw a Mishnah at the lower part of Daf Kuf Amud Beis, mentioning a number of different types of marriage, different types of women that are not entitled to the entitlements that are customary in a regular marriage. One of the points that was mentioned was that one of these women, whether it's the Ketana marriage or the Shniya, the one prohibited rabbinically because of an Arayas consideration, or Eilinus, a woman who is discovered to be incapable of bearing children, if they brought into their marriage men's suits, and the value of the suits was recorded in the Kesubos, and the man wears the suits, and they get worn out, upon the dissolution of these marriages, she does not take back with her the worn out suits. That's what Velo Bloos is a reference to. Before we go further in the Gemara itself, we glance at the side. We have a Nosei Mivneh heading. Shortly, we're going to see a trapezoid or volcano shape, one of our series markings. And on the side of the Gemara, we feature this shape, and it indicates Shlavei Birur. As the Gemara goes on, you'll see there's stages in trying to explain Al Eze Isha Omar Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana will make a comment at the opening of our Gemara where he says, Lo shanu ela nichsei malug, avol nichsei tzon barzel isla. The statement is a little vague until we can attach it to one of the cases in a specific case. But he says that this din, that there are no blows, that she doesn't take the worn out clothing with her, that's if you're dealing with nichsei malug. Nichsei malug are properties that a woman brings into the marriage, to which the husband is entitled to benefit from their fruits. However, the value of nichsei malug is not recorded in the Kesubos. So that if she brings suits in whose value is not recorded, in contrast to what we mentioned before, suits like that, so that's when she does not get the blows. But if it's nichsei tzon barzel, if it's suits whose value was recorded in the Kesubos, and when you record the value of an item a woman brings into the marriage, that means that the husband accepts responsibility for compensating her if there's any loss in value, and if there's any gain, by the way, he can profit from that. So we will see in the Gemara Rav Kahana making a distinction between nichsei malug suits, value of clothing who's not recorded in the Kesubos, versus the nichsei tzon barzel. Now, I must make a point. This is regarding the end of our previous shiur. I know that this could be a little confusing because we just started a new topic, but just for the sake of accuracy, I try to avoid situations where I discover a mistake, or in this case, it's not a mistake, but we didn't explain something clearly enough in our previous shiur. In our previous shiur, we had seen Shitas Rav Yoshua, just a few lines above where we are now, who had mentioned that a Ketana marriage is viewed quite seriously, and amongst the different things that were mentioned is that if a minor was married rabbinically to a Kohen, the Kohen is allowed to defile himself in her burial. Now, when you have a bond that's only rabbinic in nature, how in the world could that enable a Kohen to defile himself, which is a Torah level prohibition? When on a Torah level, that's not his wife. They're not related at all. It's only a rabbinic bond. So Tosfos explains, and the third Tosfos from the top, Dibur Amasel Baforas, without getting into details, but Tosfos explains that her status with regard to the husband is one of what's called a mace mitzvah. Without getting into details, all we can say for right now is that if the husband would not bury her, no one else will. And when you have a situation like that that's described as mace mitzvah, a Kohen is allowed to defile himself to see to the burial of the mace mitzvah. And that, by the way, is based on psukim that are darshaned in the Torah. Psukim in the Torah that are darshaned. So now we've fulfilled our requirement or obligation to be as clear as we can, and now we go back to our new topic. So now let's read the Gemara text. Omar le Rav Huna bar Chia le Rav Kahana. Rav Huna says to Rav Kahana, Amris lon mishmei de Shmuel. You taught us in the name of Shmuel the following: Lo ishanu elo nichsei maluk. The teaching of the Mishnah that says that she, the woman, does not get the worn out clothing, this is correct when you're dealing with nichsei maluk. Those properties whose value, properties and items whose value is not recorded in the Kesubos when they get married. When the value is not recorded, that's indicative of the idea, the fact that the husband, though the husband does receive benefit from those properties, called the peros, the benefits from those items. However, if there's any loss in value or any gain in value and the marriage comes apart, so he does not have to compensate or is not entitled to profit from it. The value was not recorded. In contrast to nichsei tzon barzel, whose value is recorded, so this teaching says that the blois of nichsei tzon barzel, suits that were brought into the marriage whose value was recorded, so the worn out suits, isla, she is entitled to take them with her. So this is the teaching that was said ultimately in the name of Shmuel, but that Rav Kahana had told Rav Huna. Avi bo Rav Papa Ahei. Rav Papa asks regarding which woman was this distinction stated. And you see, we have the series marking we mentioned before. We're going through stages and trying to figure out what this teaching is referring to. So what do you see in the trapezoids? You see Memaenes, Eilinus, and Shnia. So Ilemo Me'enes, if you were to think that this halacha is going on the Memaenes, the girl who was married rabbinically and is entitled to walk out, Id Isnu, if the worn out clothing, if those suits are there, Idi ve'idi shakla, whether it's nichsei malug or nichsei tzon barzel, she will take them. There's no knas, there's no reason to deprive her. A regular wife that is sent away from her marriage, she takes the blois. There's no reason here for her to lose out. Ve'ida lesnehu, and if they're not around, they're gone, they're lost. Idi v'idi lo shakla, so there's nothing for her to take. She doesn't get anything. Elo ailonis. Rav Kahana's teaching maybe was a distinction made within the case of an ailonis marriage. The Gemara says, no, that can't be. Id isnehu. If the blois are there, then idi ve'idi shakla, whether it's nichsei tzon barzel or nichsei malug, she will take the blois. I delesnehu, if they're not around, ibcha miboyale, then the opposite should have been the case. Namely, nichsei melug, debirushusa kaimi isla. Nichsei melug are items that are essentially hers. The husband doesn't take upon himself any responsibility with regard to the nichsei melug. They are hers. And in fact, he shouldn't have even worn them. So that is what she should receive. Nichsei tzon barzel, delav birshusa kaimi. If they were suits under the nichsei tzon barzel category, then and those are not considered in her domain because he accepts upon himself responsibility to maintain their value. So, less law. So the Nichsei Tzon Barzel are the ones, the blows she should not get. And that's exactly the opposite of what Rav Kahana had taught. There's a point in the Rashi regarding the Nichsei Malug of the islandess. If the blows are around, so she should get Isla, I Svira Loch, Ilo Le Glima, Karna Have, assuming that the glima, the garment, is viewed as principal. The garment, meaning the garment and the wearing of it, is considered principal. So if it's considered principal, the husband is not entitled to the principal of Nichsei Malug. He's entitled only to the fruits, but the suit, and the suit represents, the entirety of the suit represents principal. So he shouldn't have been using it. So therefore, if the blows around, she should be getting it. So it can't be that Rav Kahana's distinction between Nichsei Malug and Nichsei Savaz was stated in the context of Einus, because if it was, then he would have taught the opposite. Elo, we continue, Ashniya. We're dealing with a prohibited marriage that was prohibited by the rabbis. The konsu rabbanan l'dida b'didei u'l'didei b'dida. And the rabbis, they want to make a point. They impose a fine, and they make it like where it hurts, so to speak. What do we mean by that? The rabbanan imposed a knas l'dida b'didei. If we take a look in the Tosfos Rid at the bottom line, Pirush Nichsei Tzon Barzel Shehein Birshus Shalbal. You can see we're continuing with the Tosfos Rid on Amid Beis. The Nichsei Tzon Barzel are considered in his domain. Veheim Shalo, they're considered like his. So, konsuhu kishala l'shalem la. That which you thought was yours, so you have to pay her with that. Afagav delesnahu. Even if they're not around, even if they're worn out, you have to pay her. Uladida kedidei pirush nichsei malug shebirushusa hein konsuha kishalo. The afagav, the isnu, even if they're around, lo mishalem law. The nichsei malug, she will not get. The cholzeh hu lahefech. This is all the opposite of what should have been. Kedei lekalkel nisuin, so as to mess up the marriage, create a confounding situation. We continue back in the Gemara. Reading again, the konsu rabbanan l'dida b'didei u'l'didei b'dida. Omar Rav Simi bar Ashi shma mino mida Rav Kahana. We see from Rav Kahana, Ailo leglimo karno have v'lo michsi lo v'ozel adeboli. If we take a look in the Rashi, under the Gemara text, the fourth line under the Gemara text, Shma mino mid Rav Kahana diomar shniya ein lo blois denichsei malug. We saw that the shniya loses out. She doesn't get the worn out suits of nichsei malug. And why does she not get them? V'taimo mishum de konsu rabbanon l'dida b'didei. That's because of what we said, that the rabbanon imposed this knas, this fine, that which should be hers, she loses out on. Ha ishok shera. However, if it was a kosher marriage, goive oisan mimenu v'afagav delo isnehu. She would collect the suits from him, even if they're not around. What does that mean? So, for our purposes, it meant that the suits of nichsei malug are principal, and the husband has no rights to benefit from the principal. So that's what the Gemara means, that you see from Rav Kahana's teaching that only in the case where there was a sinful marriage, the shnia marriage, she does not get the suits from the husband. But if in a kosher marriage, then she's entitled to get the suits. And we say the suits, we mean the entire suit. And that the reason for that is that he shouldn't have been wearing it. The Gemara asks, "V'amar Rav Nachman pira have," but doesn't Rav Nachman say that the suits are the principal, but the wearing of the suits is considered the fruits, and a husband is entitled to the fruits? That is, the wearing of the suits is considered the fruits. So the Gemara says, the Rav Nachman Pliga, it's true. What Rav Nachman is teaching is at odds with what Rav Simi concluded from Rav Kahana. Now, we didn't explain just a technical point, but a woman who brings suits into the marriage as part of Nichsei Malug, so Rav Kahana had taught that it's considered principal and he shouldn't have worn them. So what does he do with them? So Rashi explains that those suits that she brought into the marriage as Nichsei Malug, which entitles the husband to the fruit, should have been sold, and the money received in the sale of those suits would be used to buy a piece of ground, a karka, and the ground would be cultivated and produce suits. That way you're preserving the principle, while at the same time entitling the husband to that which he's entitled to the peiros. Now, we continue in the Gemara. Ein lohen ksuba. Omar Shmuel. We saw in the Mishnah that the Memaenes and the Shnia and the Eilunis do not get a ksuba. Omar Shmuel, Lo Shonu, the teaching of the Mishnah that they don't get a ksuba elamona masayim. That's only with regard to the basic required ksuba amount. Mona in the case of a widow marriage, Mosayim in the case of a virgin marriage. Aval Tosefes yesh lohen. Tosefes is money or amounts of money that were written into the ksuba beyond the basic amount. Rashi says, Matona ba'almo yoivla b'chibas biyah. The Tosefes, a husband gives out of his own goodwill, in anticipation, or say in exchange for the idea that he is going to experience intimacy with her. And because of that chibas biyah, this bond, closeness created through intimacy, this is what motivates the husband to provide the tosefes ksuba, the additional amount. That's viewed as a gift, and that she is entitled to. Tanya Nami Hachi, and a brisa that supports this. Noshim Sha'amru Chachomim Ein Lohen Ksuba. Those women concerning whom we say they do not have a ksuba. We should point out ahead of time, this source is going to have another section to it. Section 2, you'll see in this source a slightly different expression with a totally different connotation. There's an expression, Yoitzois Shelo B'ksuba, are to leave without receiving a ksuba. So there's a difference you'll see later between these two expressions, Yoitzois Shelo B'ksuba versus Ein Lohen Ksuba. In the meantime, women concerning whom it's been said, Ein Lohen Ksuba Kagoin, Hamimaenes V'chavroseha, we saw the Memaenes and her colleagues. What do we mean? The Shnia, the Eilunis. Ein Lohen Mona Mosayim Avol Tosefes Yesh Lohen. They don't get the basic suba, but the Tosefes, which is a gift to them they receive. Nashim shamru chachamim yotzei shelo b'ksuba. However, women concerning whom it's been legislated that they shall leave without receiving ksuba, kegoin overes al das v'chavroseha. We saw earlier in this Masechta women, for example, who violate Torah law, or they violate accepted rabbinic practice. They are to be divorced, and they are not to receive a ksuba. Ein lahen toisefes v'kol shekei monim asayim. They're not entitled to the extra, and all the more so, they're not entitled to the basic ksuba. V'hayotzis mishum shemra, a woman who leaves the marriage because of a bad reputation, that she behaved immorally with other men. She will take the nichse malug that she brought into the marriage and leaves with that. Rashi points out 3 lines from the bottom, Noshim shamru bohen chachomim loshon ein lohen ksuba. That expression, yesh lan tosefes. Noshim shamru chachomim loshon yotzis below ksuba. That expression meant kol torah's gibu hifkiu mehen. All possible collection has been removed from them. They cannot collect anything, not even the tosefes. The last point of this source indicated that a woman who is dismissed from the marriage because of the bad reputation, she takes with her the nichse malug misaya le Rav Una Rav Huna. This supports Rav Huna that says zinsa lo hifsida. The Gemara continues at the top of Amud Beis, blosel kayomen. The woman who was a suspect of behaving immorally, so she is divorced and takes with her those worn out things that are still around. Tani Tano Kamei Rav Nachman. A Tanaic source was stated in the presence of Rav Nachman, Zinsa Hifsida Blosel Kayomin. Now, the text of this source is exactly the opposite of that which we heard in the name of Rav Huna. So Rav Nachman hears this source and he questions its reliability. He says, Im hi zinsa keleo mizanoi. If she behaved immorally, did her vessels behave immorally? Tani, rather you should say, lo hifsida bloseha kayomin. She doesn't lose those items that she had brought into the marriage that are worn out. She takes back with her. So Rav Nachman represents approach number 1, namely that the source that was taught in his presence was inaccurate. There's a second approach. Omar Rabo Bar Chanam Rabbi Yochanan. Zu Divrei Rabbi Menachem Stimta. You don't have to change the girsa, but rather the source that you taught was in accordance with Rabbi Menachem, who we find is the author of numerous Tanaic sources that are nameless. That's what stimta means from the word stam, no name. But nevertheless, that's his opinion. What the Chachamim, what Rav Huna taught, that is in accordance with the Chachamim. So very simply, you have Rabbi Nachem Simta says Zinsa Hifsida B'Sel Kamen, and you have the Chachamim Shita, based on whom Rav Huna said his din Lo Hifsida B'Sel Kayamin. The Mishnah on Kufa Medbei said regarding the islandess in Mitchila Nasa, if he married her initially knowing she was an islandess, then as the Mishnah said, in Mitchila Nasa L'Shem islandess, so Yesh La Ksuba. She gets the Ksuba. Omar Rav Huna, actually we should take a look at the side of the Gemara. We have a Nosei Mivneh heading. A triangle appears. And you see here a Machloikes Rav Huna Rabbi Huda, B'Kohen Gadol Sheichnis Almona V'lo Hikir Ba. Kohen Gadol marries a woman and later discovers that she is an almona. In other words, he didn't know that ahead of time. Does she get a ksuba? The double underline will be used to highlight the expression stama. Stama, for our purposes, means he didn't know. He took in a woman. If he knew she was an almona, so it was a forbidden marriage. So we saw already in the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Amid Beis the laws that apply to her. Namely, the almona l'kain gadol, she gets a ksuba. What about a case? And we should also point out we explained at the time that it's a type of knas that we impose on the kohen gadol, that she should get the ksuba because he is the one that tried to entice her into the marriage. She has a lot to lose, so you can assume that she wasn't the one that was trying to get him to marry her. And that, of course, we said in opposition to the case of the nesua, the shnia. What happens though in a case where he didn't know she was an almona? The Gemara. Omar Rav Huna. Ailinus Isha Viena Isha. Almona Isha Gemura. Now we explain that. Ailinus Isha Viena Isha. What do we mean by that? She's a wife, she's not a wife. Hikir ba yesh lo ksuba. If he knew ahead of time that she was an ailinus, so she's like a regular wife, she's entitled to a ksuba. Lo hikir ba, ain't lo ksuba. If he didn't know ahead of time that she was an ailinus, it's a mekach tois, and therefore it's a mistake. Was a mistaken marriage to begin with, and therefore no ksuba. Almona isha gemura. Bein hikir ba, bein lo hikir ba, yesh lo ksuba. Under all circumstances, even if he didn't know that the kohen gadol did not know that she was an almana, she gets a ksuba. For Rav Yehuda Omer, achazu v'achazu, whether it's an ailinus or an almana, isha v'eino isha, namely hikir ba yesh lo ksuba, lo hikir ba ein lo ksuba. If he didn't know that she was an almana, she loses the ksuba. She doesn't get a ksuba. So we contrast, just to zero in on the main point, the machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda is with regard to an almana that he married not realizing that she was an almana. Does she get a ksuba or not? According to Rav Huna, she gets a ksuba. According to Rav Yehuda, no. Meisvei. Here we have a kashi, you'll see, is directed against Rav Huna. Konsa bechezkas shikein. A woman was married knowing that she was she was an almana. V'nim say shikein, it turns out she is an almana. Yesh lo ksuba. We can infer ha stama ein lo ksuba. If, however, it was a marriage where he didn't know, and it turned out that she was an almana, she does not get a ksuba. That's not like Rav Huna. So the Gemara answers, Lo tema, don't make the inference as you just did. So don't say, Ha stama ein lo ksuba, elo ema, but rather, medayik, infer as follows. Now our goal is to find out a case. What's the case where she does not get a ksuba? This is the case. Konsa bechezkas she'eno kain. He married her with the understanding that she had not been married to anybody ever. V'nim says shehi kain, and it turns out she had been married. Ein lo ksuba. So this is the case where she tricked him. She loses the ksuba. Avol stama. where he took her in simply not aware of her having been an almana, now this case of stama is we call lo hikirba. What will the din be? Isla. So then we would infer she gets. Now this in effect is the beginning of a question though. Before we get to this, as far as the defense that was offered for Rav Huna was that when you want to make an inference, you focus on what was taught and what you infer. What was taught was a cheskas shikein, in other words, with we'll say knowledge that she was an almana, and the inference case is knowledge, his knowing, or was with the clear assumption that she had not been married to anybody. So when you have an initial state of, say, definitive knowledge, and then you find out either it's like that, then we say she gets the ksuba. And if it turns out that he was mistaken, then she does not get the ksuba. But in a case where there was unawareness, we call stama. He just made his own assumption. Then what Rav Huna said can be preserved in the meantime. But now we ask. So far, in order for us to say that she loses the ksuba, that's where he was tricked. Aval stama, the last point, which is really the beginning of a long question, aval stama, where he didn't know that she had been an almana, then what are we saying? Isla, that she gets a ksuba like Rav Huna. Aditani becheskas shikein v'nimsa shikein yesh lo ksuba. Instead of telling me almost the obvious, where he knew what she was, and it turns out she is that she gets the ksuba, l'shaminon stama yesh lo ksuba. You should have taught me the case where he made an assumption that she was not married. In other words, stama, he simply didn't know that she was an almana, and it turns out that she is an almana, that she gets the ksuba, v'kol shekein ha, and all the more so in the case where everything checked out as he originally thought it actually turned out to be. V'yoid tani, and furthermore, there's a Tanaic source that says, Kansa biyadua v'nimtzeis biyadu yesh lo ksuba. When he marries her knowing she's an almana, and it turns out she's an almana, then she gets a ksuba. Kansa stam ein lo ksuba. If he took her in without positive knowledge that she's an almana, then she does not get a ksuba. Tiyufta to Rav Huna. This would seem to refute then Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said in the Kansa stam case, and you can use the markings to see very quickly. You see the double underline stam here, and it said ein. We school in ein to emphasize she does not get. Go back to Rav Huna, and you see the question that was raised on Rav Huna, where we were inferred stamo ein law, and here we in effect bring proof that the question we asked on him was a solid question. So the Gemara responds we'll say, explain what led Rav Huna to say what he did, even though technically speaking it seems that this Tanaic source refutes Rav Huna. Rav Huna masnisin at isei. Rav Huna was confused, was mistaken by the Mishnah. Hu savar midekomaflig ba'aylinis velo komaflig ba'almona. We have a little arrow to the immediate left-hand side of the text. If you go back to Kuf Amid Beis, as the note indicates, you see the corresponding arrow on, again, Kuf Amid Beis. the Mishnah spoke about a islandess, where he did not know she was an islandess, and where he did know she was an islandess. And we saw a distinction. If he did not know she was an islandess, so then no ksuba. If he knew ahead of time she was an islandess, she gets a ksuba. So Rav Huna figured like this. He figured from the fact that the Mishnah made the komaflik ba'islandess, from the fact the Mishnah made a distinction within islandess, v'lo komaflik ba'almona, and no distinction was made with regard to almona. Almona was taught in the Mishnah as well. And there, if the Mishnah said, as a blanket rule, said the almona gets a ksuba. So, as far as Rav Huna is concerned, the almona, whether he knew she was an almona or he didn't know she's an almona, she gets a ksuba. As we said, there was no distinction made within almona. So, he figured, Michlal, let me read that again. Since the distinction was made within islandess and no distinction made within almona, so one could infer that in the case of almona, even in a stam case, she will get the ksuba, velo he, and that isn't so. Because kikotani law la almona, when the Mishnah presented the case of the almona, and the Mishnah said she gets a ksuba, aplukta the islandess koi. Plukta means in this case distinction. It's coming on the heels of the distinction that was made by islandess. So just like in the case of islandess, a distinction is made, so too in the case of almona, the same distinction must be made. Namely, that in the case of the islandess, we indicated she gets a ksuba. That's where he knew ahead of time she was an islandess. Likewise, with regard to the almona, we said that she gets a ksuba. That's where he knew ahead of time she was an almona, and he married her with that in mind. Then she gets a ksuba. However, if he wasn't aware in a positive sense, in a knowing sense that she was an almona, and it then turned out she was an almona, that we called lo hikir ba, she would not get a ksuba. Now, as you can see, we've come to the end of the 11th parak of Kesubos, and Amir Hashem, we now begin b'siyata d'shmaya, the 12th parak, hanoises isha of Maseches Kesubos. Before we begin the Mishnah, we glance at the side with a topic heading, the nosei, hanosei isha v'lo bas shoelo mi'isha acher. Man marries a woman that happened to have a daughter from a previous marriage. Upasak imo lozun es bita chomesh shanim, and the second husband, agreed to support the woman's daughter for 5 years. Hanoises isha upasak imo Kedei shiyozun es bita chomesh shanim, chayav lazuna chomesh shanim. If he made this agreement at the beginning of their marriage to support her daughter from a previous marriage, so he is obligated to do so. Niseis liacher uposka imoi kedei shiyozun es bita chomesh shanim. If that mother then married another man. If we keep track of the marriages, this would seem to be then her third marriage. It's now a second marriage with a man that agrees to support her daughter for 5 years. Chayav lazuna chomesh shanim. So the second husband is also obligated to support the girl for 5 years. The brackets that we see here are not really for skipping purposes, but it brings us to a third situation of regarding that girl. So far, she's received a committed support of 2 men, 2 husbands of her mother. Now, the girl herself in stage 3, it says in the Mishnah after the brackets, Nises habal noisin mazonas vein noisin lo demei mazonas. The husband is obligated to provide his wife with support, so he does so. What about the fact that she's getting support from 2 other men? Well, those 2 other men will put aside the cash value of her mazonas, and that's what she receives. Let's go now over the brackets. We mentioned that the girl's mother marries a second man that's willing to support the daughter for 5 years. First man agrees to support her for 5 years. Second man agrees to support her for 5 years. In the brackets, we read as follows: Lo yomar harishon l'chishetovo etzli azuna. The first man cannot say, "Yeah, I'll support her when she comes to me." That he can't get away with that. That I'll only support her when she comes to me. Now here we'll just translate literally. It means the food must be delivered to where her mother is. Where her mother is, you can assume that's where the girl will be. And likewise, these two, we'll say subsequent husbands should not, or if you call them, you can call them stepfathers. These 2 men shall not be allowed to say, "Hare onu zonin oiso kechad." Between the 2 of us, we'll support her with one. We'll say one food allotment. Elo echad zona v'echad noisein lo demei mazonos. These 2 men, each one had accepted a mazonos obligation. How much can a person eat? A person eats one let's say, defined portion, not 2 portions. So, between these 2 men, one will provide the actual food, and the other one will provide the value of the food in cash terms. Nises, when that girl gets married to her husband, habal noisein lo mazonos, the husband will support her with the actual food, v'hein noisein lo demei mazonos, and they will support her with the value of the food. Mesu, the stepfathers that we've spoken about, let us say they died, and they had their own families, because those 2 stepfathers, what happened was, as we said before, they had married the woman that had a daughter from a previous marriage. But those 2 subsequent marriages had their own children, and amongst their own children were their own daughters. Their own daughters will receive properties from their respective father's estate, but not from properties that their fathers may have sold to others. And that girl that had been brought in by her mother to those subsequent marriages, that girl is supported even from nechasim mishubadim. Mipnei shehi kebalas chov. You see, that girl received a type of shtar, a shtar mazonos, we can call it, a document, a contract entitling her to receive mazonos. This was a contract that the stepfather had issued to the mother on behalf of that girl. So the girl is coming with a shtar, and that empowers her to collect even from properties that these men, the stepfathers, had sold after their marriage to that girl's mother. So that she has she has great strength in her ability to collect her mazonos debt, much more so than these men's actual daughters. Hapikhin hoyu kaisvin almenas. The pikhin means wise or sharp-minded men who are marrying a woman with a daughter from a previous marriage, and they're willing to support the daughter. However, if they're on the ball, they would write in the contract, Almanas she'azun es bitecha meishanim kozman she'at imi. I am willing to support your daughter for 5 years as long as you are with me. But if I die, or you die, or I divorce you, then I no longer have any obligation, or my estate has no longer any obligation to support your daughter. So that way we would avoid all the issues mentioned earlier. Before we go into the Gemara itself, we glance at the side with a nosei, a topic heading, where we indicate a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, a controversy between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish be'echad shemosar shtar b'fnei edim, where a person presented a document, something written out, shikosav bo, and what's written in this document is the following: Ani chayav l'cha mona. I am obligated to pay you $100. V'ein bo chasimas yad, and this document doesn't have an actual signature in it. It might have the name of the person written in there, but it's not without his signature. Ha'im zeh mechayvoi lishalem. Does a piece of paper like that obligate the person whose name is mentioned therein to pay that? You'll see that we have diamonds that appear in the Gemara, and those are shlavei birur heichidami. We're going to be looking into what are the circumstances of this machlokes. Now, what we've done is we may have over-explained because we gave away the end of the story before actually seeing it in the Gemara. So now the Gemara. Itmar ha'oimer lechavero chayav ani lecha mona. Literally means one says to his friend, I am obligated to you to pay $100. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayav, Reish Lakish Amar poter. Rabbi Yochanan says that obligates him, and Reish Lakish says he's exempt. Heichi dami, what are really the circumstances? If the speaker appointed 2 witnesses, and he says, you be my witnesses, that I owe this guy over here $100. My time of the Reish Lakish to kapotar. Why does Reish Lakish exempt the person? That's a very formal method of obligating yourself. If the speaker didn't appoint formal witnesses, my time of the Rabbi Yochanan to kamachayev. Why would Rabbi Yochanan obligate a person? Rashi says that if a person is really interested in obligating himself, he has to appoint formal witnesses. Without that, he doesn't obligate himself, even if he says what he said. The Gemara answers, the olam delo komar lahu atem edai. The case is, we didn't formally appoint witnesses. V'hacha b'mayaskinon, di'amalei chayav ani lecha mona b'shtar. B'shtar means he wrote out. He wrote out this expression, I am obligated to pay you $100. Now this document was handed over in front of 2 people. 2 people saw it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayav alima milsa d'shtora. Alima means there is strength. There is strength to words written into a document, which was given over in the presence of witnesses. It says if he appointed them as formal witnesses. In the absence of a written document, a person can obligate himself if he states formally, you are my witnesses. If you write out this expression that I am chayav to you, and you hand over that information in writing in the presence of witnesses, that also obligates a person. Reish Lakish Amar Potter Lo Alimo Milsa Deshtar. Reish Lakish says he's exempt. This does not have that strength. It doesn't have the strength to obligate him. In the Rashi, which we'll learn together, we'll see some more detail. Rashi Hachi Garsinan Li'olam. We do have a star in the Rashi to help you find it a little faster. Li'olam de lo omar lehu atemedai v'ocha b'mayaskinon b'shtar shemosa lo shtar b'fonenu. You have witnesses saying that we saw Mr. A give this piece of paper to Mr. B. The Kesubos, and it says Ani chayav l'chomona. V'afal pi sheksav yodohu, even though he wrote it out, it's handwritten in his handwriting. Hayil v'lo chosam, since he didn't sign it, potter, he is exempt. That, of course, is according to Reish Lakish. V'hadisnan hotzilov ksav yodo shu chayav lo goyvin chosam b'nechorin. What would Reish Lakish do with that which the Mishnah taught much earlier in the Masechta, that if a person produces a document that the writer obligated himself to pay, so the receiver can collect from properties that he's holding on to? Yeah, that's different. Kagon shechosambo, he signed it. Ani ploni lovisi mana leploni. Here he did a formal signing of his name. And there in Parakisha Samala, Abaye says, Lichter chsimas yodei achaspa, aval megil telo, my taimo, dilma mishkach le v'chule, tanan hotzilov ksav yodo, alma. What we see from these Gemaras, without getting into the details of them, what we see from them is, b'chasimas yodei kamairi. Those are talking about cases where he signed his name. Avalacha hachi kosav le, but here, this is what was written: Chayav ani l'cha mana v'lo chasabo. He didn't sign it. I would imagine, but I'm not committing myself that when he says Chayav ani, he might very well have written his name. He printed his name out, but it's not the way he signs it. And that's what v'lo chasabo means. Alternatively, since it was given over in front of witnesses, it could be that even without any name in it, just by saying Chayav ani l'chomana, but the witnesses can identify who gave it to whom, that itself would obligate him. So in the meantime, we have a machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, concerning a writing of Chayav ani l'chomana without a formal signature in there, but it was given over in front of witnesses. Is that sufficient to obligate him to pay that? Mirz Hashem, in our next shiur, we'll be picking up with this machlokes. You'll notice we have a geometric form, a trapezoid, and this will be presented as a give and take style Gemara, because we will see this trapezoid shape flipping back and forth. The narrow part facing up will represent a kasha on Reish Lakish, where it seems that he does become obligated, and the inverted shape indicates a response. And if we follow this Gemara, you'll see that these shapes keep flipping back and forth. There's quite a rigorous discussion on this matter. And with this, we'll be able to figure out, by the end of the sugya, are we going to be left with a kasha on Reish Lakish, or will he effectively be able to answer it, or will have a response for it? With that, we conclude our shiur for today.